Hey, Teacher Thoughts here, coming at you with another video. Well, we rescued our plants from Home Depot from the clearance section, as I showed in a previous video, and it's now time to get those plants in the ground. So if it hasn't frozen yet in your area, this is the perfect time of year to put perennials in the ground. So, go to your garden center where there's clearance. Go to that Home Depot, Lowe's, or whatever local garden center you have, where they're clearancing out those perennials, and buy them now and put them in the ground, because you're going to get the best chance at having a bloom next year and a gorgeous, beautiful plant. So what you're going to have is plants that are going to be dormant, and then when it warms up in the spring, they're going to start growing those roots and then putting out all of that foliage and put all of that energy into performing for you with either blossoms or foliage. So yeah, don't be afraid to plant stuff in the wintertime, or at least in the fall. So I'm going to work on my area here. Now, I know my garden looks kind of ratty right now, but you have to understand that this has definitely been a work in progress. The area where we're at is really difficult soil to grow in. It's full of a lot of rocks. And not only that, there's very little silt or clay in my soil. My soil is mainly sand, because where I sit is on the confluence of two different rivers. So the Clearwater River and the Snake River. And both of those two rivers had prehistoric floods that came down them. The Snake River had the Bonneville flood, which covered the entire Treasure Valley, and along with where my property is, many, many thousands of years ago. And then the Clearwater River had the Great Missoula flood come down that. So between both of those, this area where I am was carved out as a canyon in prehistoric times. Now, when it did that, it left lots of river rock and lots of sand. Very little silt, very little clay. So when I plant plants, I have to heavily amend the soil to give it some organic material to hold those nutrients. And yeah, I know that there's several different areas where this shoreline, this prehistoric shoreline, buckled and waved, because I have areas where there's lots of rock, areas where there's soil, and then areas where there's actually yellow beach sand. So it makes it kind of for difficult growing. In addition to that, the landscapers in the 1970s, when my home was built, decided that they were going to cover the soil for a low care maintenance yard, and they covered the soil with black plastic. So everywhere I go, I'm digging up black plastic. I'm having to get through that layer, and that's since, kind of been worked down through worm castings and insects and leaf fall and such. And I get down below that black plastic where that soil hasn't had a lot of air, hasn't had nutrient exchange, and it kind of smells. So we're recovering the soil, we're recovering the landscape. And really, in reality too, this whole back area along my fence was actually covered in blackberries to about head height. So we've actually done a lot of work. We removed some trees that were dying, we removed blackberries, we removed shrubbery that we didn't want. It's been a long process. Now we're gonna get to the point where we have a garden magazine worthy garden, but it is going to take us quite a while. We've been at this for several years now, and we're just starting to get some sections of our garden to the point where they're performing for us and where we like them. But it's a long road ahead. It's going to mean a lot of amending, a lot of work, a lot of care, and a lot of change. So I'm going to take you on part of that journey of making my soil better by planting in some perennials that we rescued from Home Depot. So you get to see that whole journey. Now, I will tell you, as far as gardening here, regular shovels are about useless, because as soon as you hit a rock, you can't dig anymore. So I've come in with like hand picks, and then I go through and excavate my hole as large as I can, removing all the rock, and you're going to see how much rock comes out of one of those holes. We're also going to be underplanting underneath the tree behind me, so there are roots that we're going to encounter too. But this is really a hands-on job, which adds to a lot of the labor, which would have been easier had I been able to use a regular shovel. Now, where I grew up was about 400 miles from here, in the Willamette Valley of Oregon, which is full of all of the dirt and soil that came from northern Idaho, eastern Washington. It all ended up in the Willamette Valley, where it settled out several hundred feet thick. In fact, when I was a kid, it was a big deal if I found a rock in the dirt. I didn't find a lot of rocks. And here, I get a lifetime of rocks. Well, let's bring you in close. Let's look at what we're doing. And we'll dig a few holes and see how we're going. All right, so we're in a little bit of a shady area here, and we're going to try and see if we can get some astilbe, some hosta, and some ferns to grow in this area. So I've already got a calla lily here, and then these are hollyhocks. So we're going to kind of work around in here to add some stuff. I know I've got some roots to avoid, but we don't know what lies beneath until we start digging. So I'm going to start working right here, and I think we're going to put an astilbe right here. Astilbe, otherwise known as false spirea. As far as what color, I don't know what color this particular variety is. So we're gonna find out next spring. It could be a white, a red, a pink, a peach, any of those kind of shades. And I've got my rock bucket. Put those in here. You know, right away there's lots of rocks. We move those out of the way because they don't help our soil any. They're just more of an obstacle for us to work around. Another pretty big main root, so we're going to try to move here. I guess there's a lot of roots here. Okay, we're going to move a little bit more this direction. See if that works. And a lot of the roots here are going to be right on the surface because they're avoiding all that black plastic. Which, there's some of that black plastic right there. It goes into the rock bucket and then I sort it out later. More black plastic. I think we're going to just try to dig through some of these roots. It's not ideal, but I don't really know that we can avoid all of them. Just remove some of those. There's more of that black plastic. It's all over in here. And we're getting in the rock layer. You can see how it's kind of getting sandy. It's just a lot of rocks, a lot of sand, and about 5 inches below the surface is this lousy black plastic. So we try to remove all of it that we find when we dig holes in our yard, because that allows air to get down into the root zones, allows insect and microbial growth and things that are better for the soil to occur. And I've noticed that as I do that, the soil also takes on a different fragrance. It doesn't get as smelly. And you can kind of see how the roots of this tree have actually grown over the top of the black plastic, which is down here. So we're going to try to shoot in between these two roots. Every time you're hearing something, that's just another big rock. You know, normally you try to dig a hole larger than the container that you're putting in, you know, usually like 2 times bigger. Then you kind of commingle the soil. But here, that's kind of difficult. So we're just doing the best we can to get a hole big enough to put the plant in. Because here we water every single day in the summer. You water in the morning, or in the very early morning. By mid-afternoon, the soil's almost bone dry again. Moisture just doesn't stick around. Doesn't stick around. See how that's just very little silt, lots of sand. So as a plant nerd, kind of frustrating to deal with. Used to have a silty loam. I would just consider this a sandy soil. I think we're about good for a hole. We'll take a look and see. Grab one of these Astilbe. Not quite. Need to keep going. There we go, we'll be below the soil surface, so we'll give it a couple squeezes on the outside, pop that back, there's our root ball, in it goes. We can grab the foliage and kind of hold it together, then bring all of our native soil back around it, making sure that we bury it, and we mix our mulch back over the top. There you go, there is one Astilbe. I'm going to repeat this multiple times as I go around, trying to get other things in the ground. Got a lot of different spaces I'm going to work with, but well, it's not a huge amount of rocks. I usually get more, usually about, well, a little bit more than half the volume of the soil or material that I remove from my holes is rocks, so that makes it a little bit of a challenge. So let's move over and see if we can do another one real quick. I'm going to put a hosta over here. All right. Well, make it a little bit easier. Just collect some more rocks off the surface of our black plastic. All right. Let's see how much we can excavate here. This is one of the worst things that landscapers ever came up with. Black plastic to keep the bark in place and the weeds down. Sometimes I can get underneath that plastic, kind of work the soil back, and get bigger chunks of that. Work our hole right here. Sounds like a bigger rock. Oh yeah. We may get our hole for our plant just by taking that rock out. There you go. Not quite a football size rock. More black plastic. Yeah, let's see what we can do. Yeah, these holes often end up as rabbit trails as I start chasing that black plastic or big rocks. Haven't found any artifacts while doing this, but I know some neighbors have. So where we're at, you got to kind of be careful when you're digging holes, because you might come across tribal artifacts. As the local tribe says, they've been here for 10,000 years, so their ancestors are all over the place. And every year or so, as folks are doing excavation or work, they come across ancestral remains. The tribe will come in, do their research, and then take control of or take possession of the remains, reinter them at another location. That happens, I don't know if I could say fairly frequently, but it does happen here. So I had some neighbors just up the street that advised me they had found some remains in their backyard. So they warned me whenever I'm planting plants, you know, be on the lookout, you never know. There we go, there's a nice little hosta. But yeah, this is the hard work it takes to bring this once beautiful show garden back into the state of being a show garden. Finally getting some fall rains here, so you can kind of hear that coming down. But I'm going to keep planting in here and adding new things to my garden. Things that are going to provide good structure, good wildlife habitat, help provide organic matter for the soil, help repair the soil, and do a lot of good work here. This is sagebrush country, so you know that's what used to be here. But we're going to try to turn this into a nice display garden. Definitely a place for pollinators. I'm doing a lot of work for pollinators, especially the early spring ones, putting in a lot of bulbs. In fact, I probably should have put in a few here when I was working. I might go get some bulb bags and do that. But anyway, I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap it here and keep digging off camera since it's a lot of work. I make a lot of funny noises when I dig those holes. And, you know, as we keep going through and keep remodeling and changing and adding and fixing this, our garden is going to become much more of a display garden. You know, nice display gardens, water-wise gardens are not super common here. So I'm going to work on that and try to get it a working garden that I enjoy with plants that I enjoy. And I got to get a lot of space because we're going to have a lot of those firefly petunias again next year too. So anyway, as always, I hope you learned something. I hope you understand a little bit more about what I'm up against. And go ahead and go out and rescue some of those plants from one of your garden centers and get those perennials in the ground. As always, Ag Teacher Thoughts out.